Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the DGS Presents YouTube channel, episode 22, The Mercer Effect versus the Gingerbread Effect. Now, back when I was a teenager, we played D&D with graph paper, books and modules, maybe some Pente pieces or pennies for counters, hand drawings, and maybe some photocopies. We depended on our imaginations and the theater of the mind because we really didn't have any alternative. We certainly couldn't afford one. And this brings me to today's topic, two issues I see within the current state of the RPG hobby, and I call them the Mercer Effect and the Gingerbread Effect. Now, most of you are familiar with the Mercer Effect. It refers to the phenomenon where players and game masters expect their games to match the high quality and immersive experience seen in the show Critical Role, hosted by Matt Mercer, a professional actor. And this can lead to disappointment when the reality of home games does not match these elevated expectations. Now, players, if they're suffering from this Mercer effect, they want to have their GMs to have the elocutionary powers of a voice actor, the organizational abilities of an executive secretary, and the adventure is seen as a kind of unfolding script or dramatic narrative. This puts tremendous pressure on the DM. But what then is the Gingerbread Effect, which is in some ways kind of the opposite of the Mercer Effect? The Gingerbread Effect is when elaborate sets, props, lighting, miniatures, including oversized ones, sand tables, dungeon tiles, and castle pieces become an expected element of every game session. The GM is expected to provide tactile, re-rolled examples of things found within the game, buildings, castles, and landscapes. Here, as you see, these dungeon tiles, which a lot of us are familiar with and a lot of GMs actually use. Now, all of this stuff is obtained at tremendous cost to the GM, and it makes running game sessions an arduous task. Again, pressure's put on the GM, and players may be very reluctant to volunteer to run a game. If a $1,200 layout is necessary to run a campaign, that's a problem. It can be very intimidating for new DMs. The response to, I want to run a game, will be met with, well, yeah, where's your setup? So if we see here, like, for instance, these huge miniatures, right, that are now can be obtained on eBay for large cost, were expensive even when they came out, these big dragons and stuff. And then if we go over here to these dungeon tiles or Dwarven Forge buildings and this kind of stuff, if you look at the prices of this stuff, some of it is extremely expensive. To build a small medieval village or maybe an elaborate dungeon can cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Now, this is a spectrum. The Mercer Effect basically refers to a situation in which games are supposed to be extremely theatrical, like stage plays and voice actors and all this stuff, and puts a lot of onus on the performative ability of the GM. And of course, the imaginative abilities of the players. But the Gingerbread Effect is kind of the opposite in the sense that if we don't want to do that, instead, we're going to add all of this other stuff to the game, which is extremely expensive, time-consuming to construct, and it becomes kind of an expectation for players. So we're getting completely away from where the game really was originally, where it was just like, I have a few books, pencils, graph paper, some counters, and you're good to go, right? It's not good enough anymore. You have to have this crazy setup. But not everybody agrees with me on this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in Michael to discuss this a little bit further because he has some other ideas, and I think it's worth a good discussion. So I can't hear you, Michael.
Sorry, I was just doing some research on stuff. So
okay,
I'll put this back. File that under for later tonight.
Anyway, so the Mercer Effect versus the Gingerbread Effect.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you explain that one more time?
No, I can't explain it one more time.
Colin, I disagree with everything you just said.
Okay, because how do you run your games, Michael, and why do you disagree with me?
Well, here's the thing. I don't disagree with you 100%. I understand the Mercer effect is that these are professionals doing the thing for an audience. So they're performers, and they're excellent performers, excellent writers. It's all set up very nicely, and it's for an audience. And when you're saying that, when we go to conventions, and if people are expecting that top-notch Hollywood production, it may leave players disappointed because they're like, oh, well, that's not how I saw it when I was watching this, that, or the other thing. And the gingerbread thing is just like, for me, that's my bag. I mean, I do the costumes, I write these just crazy adventures and all the other fun stuff. So I'm like, for me, there's a balance, but I also come from a background of theater and movie making and prop making and all the other stuff. So that kind of stuff kind of fits what I can do. Now, if I'm in someone else's game, say if I'm in your game, I'm not expecting you to do the things I do, only because I have a certain skill thing. And of course, I need all the props and costumes and all that stuff because I'm not a really good DM. So I try to overload them with the theatrics, so they walk away saying, "Oh yeah, that was a lot of fun," and they forget about what a lame game I ran. So and then I dazzle them with large cod pieces too, just not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah,
So
that's
okay, yeah,
true.
that's fine. Yeah, but all right. Well, yeah. Okay. There you go. See, they see the spectacle of it all.
Right. Well, I think that there is a difference, right?
Oh, but here we go. There you are, Colin. See,
No, I didn't say I didn't use any of this stuff. So, but there is a difference between a special event at a convention
sure,
and your home game. And I think what I'm more concerned with here is the home games, and
sure,
not so much for people of our age, guys in their 50s, whatever, who have money and can afford really elaborate setups, but for newer players who just don't have they don't have the resources to build these crazy three-dimensional layouts and stuff
right,
for their home players, and B, they don't have a lot of experience DMing and they're not actors.
right.
So it's like either the players are expecting this wild setup or they're expecting this Mercer like delivery on Critical Role, and that creates a lot of pressure for GMs and it turns people off to the game, right?
No, I agree with that. Absolutely, because if you go in with your expectations so high, and new people coming into the game, this is their only experience. They see what Matt Mercer is doing, and then there's other people doing the same thing, and it's like this big elaborate thing, and all the players playing, they're all actively acting and stuff like that. Then as a player, you get a lame DM like yourself, and you're a great DM. I'm just kidding, but yeah, you get performance anxiety. It's just like, oh well, that's not how they did it on this show, and you're like, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. It's like, but then as a player, they might feel like, oh, they're not acting enough for the experience, and they're like, or they could be shy and whatnot. I mean, you and I have a lot of experience, well, especially with the conventions, because that's all I wouldn't run stuff really at the house. I was always just a convention DM. So I could write my adventures and plan it out, costumes, pieces, all that fun stuff, because I felt I had 3.5 hours, 3.5 to 4 hours to entertain a bunch of strangers. So they walk away with a good experience, and also a good experience with a, say, Star Frontiers or Star Wars or whatever module I was running, or not module, but game I was running to promote these old games. So yeah, but now at home, yeah, I have all the dungeon pieces and I would put together stuff like that, but it wasn't always about the pieces, though I do appreciate them I know that you can take it or leave it. I actually do like it because it does keep me engaged, my imagination in the game, where you're looking at these dungeon pieces and you're moving your pieces through it and whatnot.
Well,
So
I like them to an extent.
right,
I think that they can look really cool, especially if you have like a big room set up with a big giant pentagram and minis on it, and it can look really good.
sure,
And it can be immersive. I tend to prefer, and I'll explain why. I tend to prefer more two-dimensional setups,
right.
like big colorful maps, or
Oh
like,
yeah,
for instance, for my Chernobyl adventure, I have actually like the reactor itself, right?
oh
That
yeah,
covers
yeah.
most of the table. I tend to like to use custom tokens, or
Sure.
just tokens in general, to move around a two-dimensional space, because it makes it easier for me as a DM, and it's easier for the players to track their movement and to see things. And I know I've complained about this to you before, is while the dungeon tiles can look beautiful, if there's too many characters and monsters within the parameters of the dungeon tiles, I can't tell who's who,
Well, like I told you,
because they
Colin,
bleed into each other, and I can't. It's really hard for me to visualize what's going on.
right? But you have to
Be a
lay
hindrance.
off the marijuana cigarettes. That's your problem. You smoke too much of the weed. And so you're all sitting there, hey man, what's going on? Okay, maybe it's not like, okay, Colin doesn't do that. And I don't do it either because I'm a good boy.
But we can use, like, for instance, some of the custom tokens that we've created, right? Like the ones on the top there. I think that was for what, Necroscope.
Yes.
In those, like, for instance, the pictures on those pieces reflected the pictures on the character sheets
Right, right.
for the play. So, and those are very easy, even though they are minis. It's easy to see who's who when they're moving down, through a map or through a space. And then the lower example here is you running your Speed Racer adventure, where that's more two-dimensional, but you have your just matchbook. Uh, what are they? Hot
Yeah,
Wheel,
the Hot Wheel,
Matchbox cars, right?
yeah, the Matchbox, yeah.
Yeah.
That wig, man. I don't know why I was thinking. Dude, I look like a homeless guy that just wandered into
Right.
the thing.
But
Anyway,
that worked just fine, because I
oh
mean,
yeah,
again, you didn't have some big three-dimensional setup, but the cars were cute, and it added to the elements of the adventure,
oh
and
sure.
the fun.
Oh, it's fun, and I had great players for that game and stuff like that. So
Right. But then, of course, there's times when Michael goes absolutely all out. With the Marvel Superheroes Kiss Adventure, and I remember, like, everybody's ears were shattered, and they almost called the police on us.
yeah, yeah, some PTSD issues and whatnot. It's just like, well, it's for the adventure, man.
It was, but
That's my bag, baby. That's my bag.
yeah, but as far as the Mercer effect and the Gingerbread Effect, this, like I said, it's a spectrum. I don't think you want to go too far with your home games.
Sure.
Convention games are a different situation. With your home games, you don't want to go too far in one direction or too far in the other. Now, there are people who, yeah, absolutely, they can set up very elaborate things, and they're like as good as Matt Mercer. But that's, it's very rare, and that should not be the expectation of the players or the people who want to DM, because it's like they can never DM because they can never match up with what this other guy
Oh,
is doing.
sure. It should be a treat. Well, like for example, if you're in my game and I do have dungeon pieces and all that other stuff, for me it'd be a one shot, and then I want someone else to take over, but not feeling like, well, I can't top this person. It's like, well, yeah, you run your adventure. It's not a competition. Colin, I've been in your games, and I've been in Chad's game and a lot of other people's games, and for me, we could have just little chits on the table for moving pieces. It's the storytelling and the adventure that is the most important. As much as I appreciate all the other stuff, it's like only thing I need is to be engaged in the story.
Right.
And there's a lot of DMs that do it really well. Now, of course, I've been in games where you walk up to the table and the guy or gal is like, okay, well, I need you to fill out character forms. And I'm thinking to myself, I have 4 hours here. And you want me to spend an hour or 45
Right.
minutes to an hour?
That's no
Like
good.
that is, well, we had that experience and I got up and you you kind of grabbed me. I'm not doing this. And you're like, oh no. I'm like, so if a DM's not prepared for the game right there at a convention, I would suggest if the DM is not ready for you and he wants you to fill out character sheets for the immersion, leave the game. That
Yeah.
means he's stalling.
There's something to be said
Sorry.
for
Sorry.
convention. Yeah, there's something to be said for convention preparation. In both you and I, we spend copious hours preparing a game, right? I mean, I write these things up formally. I have maps. I play test them. We create custom pieces. We might have recordings. We might have this, that. But again, those are convention games, right?
Right.
Primarily, what we're talking about here is your home game should not have that threshold of
Right.
of demanding criteria that has to be met to run a game, right? And what I did too for this episode is I put together just some like tips for your home campaigns. And again, I'm not going to tell anybody how to GM, and I'm not going to say like, don't go use Dungeon Tiles. Do whatever you want, right? But here are some tips to basically to run what I think are very effective games, and these are just general kind of things that you can do which will make your games effective. And you probably haven't seen these before because there's a lot of stuff out there, people talking about this, talking about that. But for instance, number one here, if you are going to run a campaign, let's say it's Dungeons and Dragons, and you're sitting down, it's session 0, and you're telling your players what you're going to do, please avoid self-referential and abstract game settings. Now, what does Colin mean by that? If you have some wild, complex world in your head existing in a galaxy far, far away where there's, luminescent dragons with lasers coming out of their eyes and all sorts of crazy polysyllabic words and names for everything, and some history that goes back 3,000 years about like it, and I've had this happen, guys literally showing up with a 20-page backstory on the campaign that like nobody has any idea what this guy is talking about
At a convention, by the way.
It's just, yeah, it's bad because it basically turns into this.
What are you waiting for?
Gozer the Traveler. He will come in one of the pre-chosen forms. During the rectification of the Voldrani, the Traveler came as a large and moving torb. Then, during the third reconciliation of the last of the McKettrick supplicants, they chose a new form for him, that of a giant slor.
Right? I don't have any patience for that. Try to keep it somewhat real world analogous, right, to medieval Europe or China or Japan. Like, try to keep it.
Well, here's the thing, Colin.
Accessible.
A DM can do that, but that's usually what he does when he catches you at the bar right before closing time and like locks you in a conversation for like 2 or 3 hours
about his character,
about his back world, and you're trying to just figure out a nice way to say, oh, I gotta go. Like, oh, I don't know, catch yourself on fire. I remember that one time we were at that one party, we had a DJS party, and that guy and girl were like so into that one campaign and started talking to me about it. And then you passed by and I kind of like passed it on to you and I bailed. And I started going around the party and you sat there for like an hour listening to these people because you're too nice to leave. And I almost felt bad about passing that over to you, but I'm like, well, better him than me.
Oh, I know. I was at that. We threw a party at Gen Con in 2012 at the Canterbury, and again, these were nice people, but
yes,
nice people. I was talking to this guy, just having a drink, and he proceeded to tell me all about his Rifts game and his Rifts world and his Riff's character. And this went on for like 20 minutes, right? This guy was just going on and on about this. And I could not extricate myself. But then his girlfriend came up, seemed like a nice girl. She came, bouncing over with a drink. I'm like, oh, yes, I am saved. And then she proceeded to tell me about her Riff's character and her Riff's role. And this went on for like an hour. So, yeah,
See,
I laugh about it now. I just,
Colin, you're a nice person. You're a good person. You're like first in line when you go to heaven. Me, I don't have time for that shit. And I'm very nice about it. And I'll very politely say, I don't care about your character.
True.
You want to talk about something else? And if they look at me, I'm like, I'll see you later.
Oh, yeah. But anyway,
no
back
patience.
to this. So, point 2 here.
Colin, let me tell you about my character.
Oh, yeah. No.
All right.
So, point 2. Emphasize the individual skills, vocation, and personality of the player characters over providing false balance between PCs. Okay, if all PCs are the same and they can all do the same stuff, right? That's not realistic, and it's not challenging at all for the players. Even seemingly weaker PCs in any game system can have some sort of special skill or ability or something that's critical to, ensure success in the adventure or maybe prevent the deaths of his or her teammates.
Prime numbers. I can't believe I didn't see it before.
See what?
It seems like if any of these numbers are prime, then the room is trapped.
Also, point 3 here, which we talked about a little bit before.
I want to go back to point 2.
Okay, go ahead.
Because about the balancing of players, and this is really, I think, an important thing for game masters, for DMs.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you're writing these characters, you want to make sure every character has something to do, and sometimes it falls through the cracks. So it's up to the DM to, on the fly, give that person something to do. Colin and I ran a Star Trek game years ago, and we're going off a module. And it turned out the guy who was playing the Captain Kirk character just almost like took over the game because he's Captain Kirk and he can do everything. And so then we had to scramble to make sure that Sulu had something to do, Spock, and everything like that. So you need to do that and be aware of that, because while you're writing an adventure, you think everything's going to be balanced and stuff, and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of it and you're like, oh shit, this one person is doing everything. And so that's why it's really good to be to have those skills to be able to make up stuff on the fly so no one gets bored. Pay attention to your players. If someone's fiddling with their phone, they're not engaged. So what you do while you're doing it, you have to make up something that's part of the adventure on the fly to pull him out of his phone, or her out of her phone, or them out of their phones, and bring them into the game. As a DM, you always have to be constantly aware of your players and what they're doing. And going back to number 1, is that when a DM is so engaged in their own adventure, their headcanon, and all they're doing is basically reciting the adventure to the players, it's boring. And you'll be sitting there, and if you look at your players and they have that faint kind of like imagining what they're going to do after this torture session, you're doing a bad job. That's why eye contact, make sure everyone's engaged. I mean, those are the most important thing.
Oh, yeah.
About any game. Colin, you're really good at it. Chad is, Greg is, not me so much, but that's why I have confetti poppers and things like that. It wakes people up. I don't know why, but that's just me. Anyway, sorry, Colin. I just wanted to touch on that because I feel that's very important.
I'll add to that. It as a player too, see what your character imagine what your character can do. So a good example is I was at a convention where I was in a Cthulhu game. This really cool game that this guy ran, and my player character, which I actually chose, was like this flapper girl who had a taste for expensive clothes and perfume and jewelry and fast cars and this kind of stuff. And, like, she had like no skills, right? I mean, she couldn't like read Latin. She can't fire a gun. Like, so I thought to myself, like, what can she do? So the adventure was like this murder mystery where we're trying to figure out, you know, who killed this woman who lived in town. And what I did is I said to myself, what would this character, this girl that I'm playing, what would she know? Well, you know what? When she goes into the murdered girl's apartment, she's going to be able to do things like figure out what the girl was wearing that night, what kind of perfume she put on that night. And, you know, this was a measure of maybe how important the person she was meeting was. Yeah. So I kind of put this stuff together, and later on we were in the morgue, and I was able to actually, you know, the body was like presented to us, and I was able to like sniff the girl, her neck, figure out what the perfume was. And then I sniffed a guy's tie later on in the adventure, and it was the same perfume. So I connected the dots using a player character who basically had no other obvious like combat or even investigative skills, just by figuring out what the character would know. Right. But that's all you have to do. And that makes it so much fun.
Right. And also to go along with that is that this was not written into the characters. It's what you brought to the character.
Exactly.
And the DM didn't even write that into the campaign, but by really getting the character like you did, it added so much more to the campaign, which I'm sure the DM appreciated, because they were just like, wow, okay. You know, in the back of their mind, they're like, okay,
yeah, he was like ecstatic. He was thrilled. And just another quick story. I had another game where I was running at a convention, I think last year, and it was a D&D like desert campaign that was in the Emirates of Alarum. And one of the characters was this like imam character. He was a cleric, but he was like a cleric in like the Arabian desert kind of thing. And he was like an imam. The player himself totally played this up, right? He just got totally into character, and he was just perfect, because he understood exactly like how his character would act or react to things. It was just perfect. So again, work with what you have.
Sure.
This whole idea of balance between characters is like a 5e WotC thing that I don't support it. I think that it removes challenges in the game. Work with what you have. So anyway, moving on to number 3 here. The rest of these are pretty simple. So number 3, always include handouts of some kind, especially artwork or photographs, and you can include props like we saw from Michael. You know, use art. Even if you have to do the drawing yourself, right? You know, present the characters with something. It's good for them to visualize things.
Sure, it's engaging.
It is, and we remember back from the old D&D modules, like, you know, the Lost Shrine of Tamoashin, right? It had all those like beautiful drawings and everything, of like the Aztecian ruins and everything. That stuff is great. Or the Tomb of Horrors, they had that whole booklet in there, which showed you like that big gaping mouth with like the sphere of annihilation in it. That stuff's always good.
Right. Anything you can use to engage your players at the table and help them, you know, with their imagination and all that stuff. I mean, why not? Especially for convention games.
Right. Yeah. And number 4 here, this gets into kind of OSR stuff. It says, you know, rulings from the GM are more important than the rule books, but I'm going to add to that, provided the rulings are logical and fair.
Yeah, because you never want to be cracking open a book while you're running a game. Just do things on the fly. Ooh.
Yeah, exactly. And
back to business.
Just make sure, right, the rulings make sense, and don't get so caught up with the rule that it has to be by the letter. I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, Gary never said it had to be like that. Most other gaming companies and authors, you know, they're just like, hey, these are guidelines. You can use what you want and create up your own home rules or homebrew stuff or whatever.
Right. I was running Marvel Adventure once, and a player wanted to. He was playing night. Oh God, what? The guy who could bam.
Nightcrawler.
Nightcrawler.
Yeah.
And they were fighting Sentinels, and he wanted to bamf inside one of their helmets and break things apart. And it's just like, yes, the rule says he has to have line of sight or have already been there before. So I said he could do it only because A, it's a convention game and it would add to the players' excitement and fun. So I allowed it. It's just like, but if I would have cracked open
You're the
book,
GM.
like, oh no, you can't do that. It's like,
Yeah, you're the GM.
and disappoint the player. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. However, if you want to do something that was so game breaking, then I would have to say no. I'd make up a reason why.
Yes.
It's very simple.
It is. And let's see, number 5 here, make players work for rewards, especially in your home game. No Monty Hall, no handing out stuff that just giving them crazy treasure and stuff. It just takes away the excitement, right? Finding a +1 sword should be like a really big deal.
Yeah.
Finding that artifact tome filled with spells in a Call of Cthulhu game under some cathedral. Yeah, that's awesome, and it should be rare and difficult to do.
Yeah, and it just makes it so much more fun. It doesn't have to be something so overpowered. And the other thing on that, don't punish your players. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's like, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, you want to make it where people are having fun and they're finding things that are just interesting or neat. Even if it's, like you said, like that book, it could just be like really cool. It maybe doesn't really have anything to do with the adventure, but the player character can say, oh, out of game, I'm going to see if I can study this and whatnot, and gives them something to look forward to out of game or whatever. So,
indeed.
Sure.
And number 6 here, this is a big one. And I think this is something that's really neglected in a lot of games that aren't Call of Cthulhu, right? Attack the mind and emotions of the player characters. So this is a GM tip. Ravenloft, the box set for Ravenloft that was released in 1990, had like horror rules. You could have like horror checks. Obviously, Call of Cthulhu has sanity checks. I think the Ghost or Unbidden or maybe Ghost Stories, one of those games also has like dementia. So remember that if your character is going through some horrific situation, some campaign in which they've just seen horrible things and they've been subjected to these arduous, deadly scenarios and everything, it may get them a bit unhinged. So like the new Alien game, I just ran a campaign for my wife and kids. We had a lot of fun. That game is beautiful with the whole like stress mechanic. In real life, you're just going to freak out if you're on a ship in the middle of outer space, right? Life support's running down and there's xenomorphs all over the place, right? You are going to get unhinged. So always think about, even in the context of D&D, think about ways to kind of stress the player characters because it's realistic.
Oh yeah. Well, I used to do that. Yeah, I used to do that a lot. And then 3 restraining orders later, I had to stop. So, but I agree.
That's right. And then, number 7 here, have clear objectives, missions, and plots in the adventure. This goes without saying. I am not of the school that, this is a sandbox, just do whatever you want. Like, I don't know what the overarching plot here is. Like, just, I don't know, I'm going to roll for random encounters, wander around in the woods. No, have some sort of, overarching mission that the party is responsible for accomplishing. But you can have side quests, you can have little things. A good example is I remember Greg ran the city state of the Invincible Overlord. He had a huge map. It was like the size of a pool table. And the party, I was one of the players, we had to go into the city state, this massive city. And we had to meet up with this cleric or something from some neighboring province in a week's time. So that was like the overarching story. Like, we had to meet this guy, but we have a week to mess around in the city state of the Invincible Overlords. We got in all kinds of trouble. We're like gambling and like somebody tried to assassinate us, ended up in the sewers. Like, all this crazy stuff happened, but there was still a plot, right? About what we were supposed to ultimately do. So keep that in mind as a DM.
Oh, sure. And that's great for like home campaigns and things like that.
Yes.
Once things are going last week. Of course, conventions, you don't want to sit there for 4 hours,
No.
flipping around a city. And it's like, okay, now the adventure begins. Oh, we're out of time. And you pack up and leave. Could you imagine that? Oh, man. I always wanted to run a game where I would come to the table and have players roll up characters for about an hour. And as I'm fiddling around with something else, and just like spend 3.5 hours of not running the game, just doing other stuff and like doing like just to see how much they could take.
Nobody's ever
they leave.
Right, Michael? Were you in that game?
Which one?
Basically the one you're describing. What, one of the old TSR alumni?
Oh, no. I know exactly.
I was literally in the game.
You were there.
The guy was out like smoking the whole time, like told us to roll up characters. I never even rolled the dice. We never got past the first hallway. We couldn't even get past the first door. It was like 12 people in the game. It was.
Oh, yeah.
If I didn't have a beer with me, I probably just would have walked.
Well, my thing is, I don't. So when, especially early on, where they had the old guard running games, they'd have like 12 or 15 people around the table, and I understand why, because a lot of people opportunity to play with one of the old masters, and
right? But it's impossible to run.
But I sat there going,
that many people in it.
Do I want to sit here for 4 to 6 hours screwing around, or do I want to go and see if I can get laid? Do other things.
Okay. Yeah, because that happens
with my time, or maybe even run an adventure.
True. Anyway,
just saying.
Last point.
Kinky.
The number 8 here. The game is just about excitement, creation of a narrative, suspense, and fun. Goes without saying.
Yep.
We talked about this. And as far as, all of this tying into the Mercer effect and the Gingerbread effect, just remember that last point. You don't need to spend $1,200 on some crazy setup in order to prove to your players that you can create this fantastic gaming experience.
Yeah, you're the best.
Gaming is a collaborative thing between the GM and the players. It should not be adversarial. And again, some of those early guys back in the days in the 70s, early 80s were kind of was adversarial. It's kind of like, can I kill the characters? I'm going to be very challenging to the players. I'm not out to kill them. And I'm not out to just make life miserable for them. And that is just bogus.
But that comes from the personality of the DM.
It does.
Because there are some people out there that's what they get off on. It's not about the adventure. It's about punishing sometimes friends, sometimes strangers. And it makes no sense to me. It's like, yeah, like I said, I don't get that behavior at all. And it really just, it's so beyond my.
I haven't run into too much of it. I mean, that's kind of that's one of like the kind of bad elements of real old school stuff back in the day when it was just kind of like, oh, can I sucker you into like a pit trap or putting your arm into the sphere of annihilation. Again, yes, challenge players, but don't just try to like kill them. It should be a collaborative and fun experience, and people should be. They should feel like they can GM without having to be Matt Mercer,
right,
and without spending stupid amounts of money.
Or me. I mean, a lot of players try to emulate me because I'm so good at what I do, and I just tell the people, you don't have to. Just be you. Don't be like Colin though, but just be yourself. I'm kidding. Colin's great.
That's right. So anyway, this is like 40 minutes now. Let's we're going to wrap this up, and if you like what we're doing here, please hit like and subscribe. Again, we're just doing this for fun, and we will see everyone in the next episode. So say goodbye.
I'm going to get back to my research.
Oh, there you go. Okay. And before we get canceled, I'm going to end this. Goodbye, everyone.